All right, so good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Katie Legacy webinar. It's going to be moderated by Miss Moore White. That's me. I teach history here at King Drew, and I'm an alumna of King Drew class of 2008. And then we also have with us
Mr. Brandon Sankara. Most of you alumni will know me as Brandon Bell from the class of 2007, presently substitute teaching in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. So, I never left the hallways.
All right. And so, the highlighted people that we're going to talk about here, they're not the only important figures that helped establish the King Drew known today, but they are an invaluable resource in the early structural development of the programs essential to our legacy. And especially in the midst of the pandemic and societal upheavals, it's even more important to rediscover and recover the history in our community and especially that of our wonderful high school. So we're going to start this off by having introductions of our panelists. So they're going to give you their name, how long they were associated with King Drew, and what their title was when they were working with King Drew. So let's start it off with Miss Malbrough.
Yes, I'm Edna Marlboro. I was recruited by Shirley Stark in 1986 as the first counselor. She finally got enough money to hire a counselor, and then my second year through 2005, I was the magnet coordinator.
All right, and next up, we have quite a guest, Miss Shirley Starke-Wallace.
Hello, my name is Shirley Starke-Wallace, and when I was at King Drew, it was Shirley Stark. And I was there from 1984 to 1994 as the first principal of the new school that was opened up right next to Charles Drew, to the college, right next door to the college and across the street from the hospital.
All right, beautiful. And now we have Dr. Schumer.
Yes, my name's Rob Shumer. I was a graduate student at UCLA and also a consultant in developing the curriculum in the hospital program at King Drew from 82 to 85, I guess.
All right, and now we have Dr. Bloom.
I'm Ron Bloom. I was a faculty member of the Drew University and a member of the medical staff in the Department of Pediatrics of the hospital, and was at the school during its creation in the 1980s. That maintained a relationship until I left in 1992.
All right, and last but not least, I think we have a superstar in the house. He's definitely also Katie famous. So Mr. Siegel, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Steve Siegel, and I was the English teacher that Miss Stark hired in 1985, and just recently told me that it was because I enjoyed sports, not my English background. But anyway, and then I was there until 2016. So it was 30 years of being a little over 30 years of being an English teacher, and then the last 7 years I was able to be part of the careers hospital program with Miss Cooper and Miss Thigpen, of course, and it was tremendous. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Sankara.
All right, so getting things started with you, Mr. Siegel, KED English teacher from 1985 to 2016. My own personal AP English Lit teacher from 2007, of course. So, Mr. Siegel, talk a little bit about your process of going from the bungalows to those 4 acres, the history of the Medicine and Science Careers Program, and your experience at King Drew.
All right, well, thank you. It's just great to be here with everybody, and thank you again for putting this together. They talk about the bungalows, and in 1985, I knew that it was so new that the cement had just been poured so that there were actually steps leading into the bungalows. There was only a half-court basketball area that was the PE area of the school. We had no cafeteria, no auditorium. We barely had a facility. The beauty is there's only 200 students or so, and that 10th, 11th, and 12th graders not only had an academic program, but they were also all going to the hospital because, again, we only had a couple of hundred. So they went to the hospital, they went to Watts Health Center. There was a Kaiser Permanente facility nearby. We got students to go all over the place, and Miss Malbrough will probably be able to help have that as an understanding a little bit better. But for my own interest, we worked intensely to try to give students an enriched experience. There were only 10 of us. So if half of us did a ton of work, then you would be the senior sponsor, the yearbook sponsor, you coached volleyball, you taught kids how to juggle, you had a partner from 1992 to 99, David Miller, who is now your Latin teacher, but he was instrumental in the English department, and he directed the first play that we ever put on, and it was thanks to other organizations in the community that we even had a facility to do that. But all of King Drew during the bungalows, I mean, we had so little room that once the Allied Health building was put on a open lot, and we were able to use that to take the advanced placement exams because we needed a quiet space, and there really wasn't a spot on our campus, and we were already offering AP courses. So Charles Drew stepped in. Even their library, which was really for graduate students, was incredibly helpful in the earlier years. And so we really depended on our relationships with Charles Drew, King Drew, and the hospital, other facilities out of the, the Watts Towers. Also, we had art interactions continuously during those times. From 85 to say 99, I know that Miss Stark until 1994 told me that the 4-acre campus was right around the corner. In fact, she said that in my interview when I was first trying to be hired, when I couldn't even find the school because it was so small. And once I was there, she kept telling me they're going to build us a school. And thanks to Sweet Alice Harris and Dorothy Rochelle and so many of the other people who are the community activists, as well as all of the people like Dr. Bloom and Schumer that put that together with Dr. Shaps and so many others. We were able to finally get that school built, the one that you're at now. And the transition, though, we also realized that, I don't know if the students are happy about this or not, but we never had a dress code until we moved into the large school. We were supposed to dress more nicely, and we had lab coats at the time to go to the hospital sites. But when you were at school, you could wear whatever you wanted. And of course, I had a great collection of t-shirts because I was playing basketball continuously during the, every chance I could get with the students for volleyball. At the same time, once that school was built, we knew that it had to expand the concept. It had to be more than medicine, and we had to create it as even the title had to change to medicine and science to give students more of an opportunity to build off of a college prep program with an experiential component for juniors. And remember, again, the entire school in the bungalows was 100. We were moving to 15, 16, 1,700 students. And so we knew that not all of them could go into experiential work and space, as well as all these clinical sites. We had to do something. We had to expand our mentoring programs with USC and all kinds of different corporate engineering firms. We had to do so much. And that was instrumental with once we got involved in the larger campus, then Michelle Woods, Tabitha Thigpen, once Miss Malbrough retired, had to really start to think about where else could we bring students and have other experiences in medicine, health, science, because that was what our magnet designation meant. At the same time, we also had a need to continue expanding our cultural elements, not only to the Watts Towers, but to the Music Center, to theaters throughout Los Angeles, to all kinds of art, museums, because we wanted our students, thanks to people like Miss Aubrey in the art department, we knew that we needed to expand our programs, not only in art, but in music and so many other things, and obviously our whole Latin department, as well as French. We were going to have the teaching and the teachers to continue that process. So and I'm so happy that, of course, it has continued. And we do have students at the VA and UCLA, as well as, just all the different community areas and health clinics throughout Los Angeles. We have students almost everywhere now. So it's been a great experience to be a part of it. And I just want to thank you allowing me to be here today. It's really been quite amazing. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Siegel. And next up, Mr. Sankara, you ready?
All right, moving on, we have Dr. Ronald Bloom, Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Charles Drew's Postgraduate Medical School from 1971 to 1992. Dr. Bloom, can you provide for our alumni, our current students, everyone that's here supporting King Drew now, a longer history on how King Drew Magnet High School of Medicine and Science came to be, and the essential elements and people that played a role in its creation?
Be glad to. I went over a short history in the first talk, but let me expand on that a little bit. As I said, there was a report by 3 organizations which outlined the problems of Watts 15 years after the riots, of jobs and schools. It was shown to me, and in a somewhat sarcastic way, I said, writing the report was fine if it gave them good, warm, fuzzy feelings. But what good would it do? Well, I said that to the wrong person. He looked at me with laser vision and said, "What would you do?" And I knew that I had to come up with an answer. I asked him if I could have a couple of weeks. He said yes, and I went off with my tail tucked between my legs. I was watching an interview with Max Lerner, a noted writer and educator, when he was asked to define the essence of America in a single word. And he used the word access. And that struck me. To expand on what he was saying that in addition to an education, an understanding of options and how to access those options are fundamental elements of attaining whatever goal you set for yourself. Then the idea came together. I returned with a concept of building an academic school, integrating a strong experiential component. And it was driven by 2 aspects. I was convinced that providing a quality education to inner city kids, they could learn and they could be highly competitive. And if we added an experiential learning to the academic learning, we could expand the understanding of options, the development of networks leading to access. In the early stages, the concept received support from 2 critical people. One was Bill Delgado, the administrator of the hospital. He agreed to have students work at the sites in the hospital and to have easy access throughout the medical center. Most people would have turned me down, but he didn't. And Dr. Alfred Haynes, the dean of the school, threw his support behind the magnet school. The organizations that wrote the original paper agreed to work with the school board to get approval, and I was to take the concepts I had laid out and incorporate them in the new school, something that I've said I was completely not qualified to do. I wrote a grant to RWJ to get someone to help. I received the grant and approached Harry Silverman, professor of education at UCLA, and asked him to recommend someone, and he recommended Rob Shumer. Rob came on, he had a complete understanding of the concepts of experiential education and the importance of integrating them into an academic curriculum. I'll let him tell his story. The first year in recruiting students, Alice Harris was invaluable. Sweet Alice held a block party in which she pushed the idea of the school, and if not exactly telling specific students that they had to go through there, pretty much implying it. The school started out with only 2 bungalows, 2 teachers, no equipment, and the students spent part of their time at Jordan High School. There was limited leadership and limited oversight. In the second year, with some pressure on the school district, they expanded the bungalows, put in a few more, hired some more teachers, and the leadership was a part-time administrator from the school district itself. Overall, it was still not working out. The school needed full-time committed leadership. a discussion was held with Harry Hangle, the superintendent of schools at that time. And I remember him saying to me, Ron, every day I get up wondering what I do not know. That's a quote that has stuck with me ever since he said it. But he did know of Shirley Stark. He had a lot of admiration for her as a counselor, and he asked her to provide the leadership for the school. Now that both Rob Shumer and Shirley Stark were on hand, the rest is history. Many other people contributed enormously to the success of the school. But I think there's a moral in here. It's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to bring it to reality. It took a great many people to bring this school to reality. And the most essential person, if you look back in history, was Shirley. By providing extraordinary leadership mixed with compassion, discipline, and a genuine interest in the kids, she was the heart and soul of the school. Without her, the school would never have attained the success that it did. She also championed the building that you are in today.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Bloom. All right, so next up, we're going to follow that with Dr. Robert Shumer. He was a graduate student and assistant director / director of field studies at UCLA between 1982 and 1992. So Dr. Shumer, can you give us the history of your doctoral research for King Drew, because you used King Drew to get your doctorate?
Happy to share it with you. It was, as Ron suggested, when you look at the history of King Drew, it's like the history of so many things. It's all about lucky breaks and meeting people that you had no idea were going to change your life. So when I was working in the 70s, I shared earlier, I was running an alternative program at a high school in the San Fernando Valley that had kids doing experiential learning. They spend 50–60% of their time in the community learning their academic subjects. And so when my chair, Harry Silverman, said that there was this high school that was being developed in Watts, and they wanted some assistance, I said, I'm happy to go meet. And I had a chance to talk to Ron and was excited to find that the medical center was really interested in helping to develop the school. And I said, it was really kind of ironic. I said, because when I was 16, I had done an internship with a hospital in the San Fernando Valley in the summer, and I had learned more chemistry than I ever learned in my chemistry class. So I had a good idea of what it meant to actually learn in a field setting. And so I had an opportunity to begin to develop the program. The first years, kids were moving back and forth between Jordan High School and coming back to the bungalows in the afternoon. And so I set out to try to develop field sites, as we call them, based on this experience-based career education model that had been developed in the 70s. And there were schools like this all over the country that were trying to figure out how to engage the community in real learning and learning about careers. And so we set out a plan to try to have kids go in the 10th grade for 3 hours and the 11th grade for a full day and then a day and a half to really get involved in their senior year. At least that was the original plan. And so for my dissertation, I was really interested in this process about how do you develop a high quality learning experience in a field setting. So I had an opportunity to follow students around from King Drew and to work with some of the teachers and to interview students and interview the hospital people to try to find out what really made for good learning in a community. And we interviewed the students and we did a survey and asked them what were the good sites and what were the lousy sites. And the kids told us which ones they thought were the best and which ones were the not so good. And so I went back to those sites and I had a chance to talk to the people who were running those sites and came up in my dissertation with some interesting findings. And one was that the hospital supervisors would size up the kids early on when they came, the first or second session. And if they thought the kid was smart and interested they'd give them really responsible tasks to do. If they thought they weren't that interested, they would give them rather mundane tasks. And so when the kids said that the site was really interesting or it wasn't, we started to realize it really had something to do with the actual assessment of the supervisor and the activities that the kids were doing when they were at the site. So we also learned that the site supervisors relied on the school people to help them to understand what was required in the school in the academic program that they might be able to teach. So as I had mentioned earlier, if you went to pulmonary functions, you could actually learn about the pulmonary system and breathing. And this was Los Angeles in the 80s when we had a lot of smog. So how was that affecting people? But we also discovered that there were, X-rays that were being taken. There were the blood gas analyzer. The kids could learn about pH, so they could learn a lot of the principles that they would normally learn in chemistry, but they would learn it in the context of working in the pulmonary system. The other thing is that the kids could actually do some service, so they could take their knowledge and go to the middle school and teach kids about the dangers of smoking and actually talk about it from a more scientific background. One of the things that also happened was the development of the networks and helping the kids to begin to understand that in the career exploration, that they would focus on lots of different careers. And part of our goal was to have them learn to respect all of the careers in the medical center, so that when they went into a surgery unit, they would realize that it was electricians and plumbers who helped to set up the machines and all the tubes and things in order to make the operations work. And so the hospital was really a microcosm of the whole community. And one of the things that stuck out with me in terms of the importance of getting kids connected to all of the people in the hospital, we did a presentation, I think it was in '85, to the school board to talk about King Drew and what impact it had. And the one thing I'll always remember is a young man who was saying, I never thought that I could get out of the inner city without playing basketball or football. He said, until I met a pharmacist at the medical center. He said, I didn't even know there were Black pharmacists, but we got to be able to talk to each other, and he became my mentor. And I decided I was going to go to Long Beach State in order to pursue a career in pharmacy. And so one of the things that I also learned from my dissertation was the importance of the interpersonal connections and the mentoring that was taking place between the students and the community members. And the last thing I'll mention was the importance of the community. I did a small study to look at the impact of the school district and the medical center in terms of their contributions to the program, and discovered that the medical center was contributing almost as much money as the school district when you considered the actual time that the doctors, the nurses, and all of the professional staff were contributing to the students' education and the equipment. I still remember at Jordan High School, they had a piece of equipment that looked like a 1940s washing machine. And when you went to the hospital, you saw that the equipment was very modern, and it didn't look like that at all. We were the only high school in the country that had $1 million electron microscope in our science program. So kids were learning how to use electron microscopes, and they could actually go to community college to get technical training. So I guess I'll sum things up by saying what I learned in my dissertation was really that doing quality experiential learning really involves active communication between the school district and its teachers and the community members, so that they could teach each other about what their goals were, and we developed relationships. So King Drew was really a team effort. The teachers were incredible in terms of how they tried to include the hospital experiences in their programs in English and social studies, and the people in the medical center were really welcoming of trying to have kids not only volunteer to do service, but to actually learn things about science and other technical and academic areas. And so for me, it was a great opportunity to understand the experiential learning process and how it was a real team effort.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Dr. Schumer, for that. And I think it's just so important to really hear this history and to hear that the doctors at Martin Luther King Hospital and the faculty and the doctors at CDU were fighting and advocating for a school like King Drew to be in our neighborhood. That is so important. And we know that we would not be here without that. And so one thing that I'm also really enjoying too is all the gratitude that's being shown amongst the panelists. So one person is saying this school would not exist without this person, and someone else is saying the same thing. And so now we're going to get to, in my opinion, one of the stars of this panel. We have the first principal of our school. We have the honor of having Miss Shirley Starke-Wallace. She was the first principal from 1984 all the way to 1994. And right after she was removed from King Drew, she wrote a book, or wrote a chapter in a book, excuse me. And part of that talked about the principal precepts and things that she kind of really embodied when she was principal. And one of them says, implementing change involves risk, both personal and professional. Risk must be taken as the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. It must also be understood that improvement does not occur overnight, but instead requires sustained effort over a long period of time. So, Ms. Starke-Wallace, can you just talk about some of the risks that were taken and that you took to implement the plan that developed into King Drew?
Well, when I was first assigned to the school, having worked as a counselor before for the district, but to have a school in which we do not have a counselor, it really meant that there were a lot of things that I had to do in order to help the students. And one was that I had to work with the parents. We invited parents very early to come before school started because we were going to ask the parents to help us to provide the students with their time to actually do their homework at school. And then the parents became a very important group for us and helped us in many aspects of the school. We also went to some of my friends who had also moved from the district and had retired. And I had to ask them, would you please volunteer and come and help our students at King Drew? And one of my friends came all the way from Pasadena to come each week to serve as a counselor for our students. And then eventually we were able, as a result of our program and some of the things we were able to accomplish, to actually hire a counselor for our school. And I had gone to a meeting in which counselors were making a presentation, and I got to hear Miss Malbrough discuss her views and the things that the questions she asked and the answers that she provided really impressed me. And I was thinking, oh boy, if we could get her to come to King Drew, it would be remarkable. And as a result, kept working when finally the district decided that we would be able to have a counselor at our school. I worked and asked her, would you please come? And I know it was a little question for her at first because I went to her school where she was working and asked, would you please come to King Drew? We really would love to have you here. And she did finally come and managed to become an outstanding person for us to have at King Drew, and ended up, as I've always been grateful for the opportunity that she provided for students to go to college during the summer, all throughout the United States. And I thought that was just a wonderful experience and all the things that she did to help us to implement our program. It was a wonderful, wonderful idea that you have to take risks. You can't do anything overnight, but you have to know that your ideas and your concepts, if they are important, you have to keep working for them. And as a result of the support that we received from Drew, the Charles R. Drew University of Medicine, who worked with us from the beginning, worked with me from the beginning until my very end, and then even invited me back to come back to give me an award after I had been removed from the school as the principal. And it was my first real recognition that I had received overall, but they were so significant. And then when you speak of what Mr. Schumer did to help us develop a program in which we were able to get students to understand the significance of medicine and health and what they could do by having the experience at the hospital, really proved just invaluable for us. So risk means you have to work for it. Wish, you have to know what you have to do to get it implemented, and you keep working on that particular concept, which went back to our legacy of trying to implement what they wanted this school to start as a result of the efforts of Drew and the Martin Luther King Hospital, of asking for this program, and for Drew to give part of their property in order to build our school. The risk they took in doing that was unbelievable because we were small, but we were able to get started. And as a result, we were telling students, if you were at another high school and you was being told that you need to graduate, if the person sitting on both sides of you, probably only one of you will graduate. But at King Drew Medical Magnet High School, we're going to make sure that you graduate. And as a result of the help from the parents, as a result of the help from the Drew University, as a result of the help that we got from the hospital, we were able to end up with just about always 90% of our students being able to graduate. And if those students got a D, or if those students got an F in a class, they had to go to summer school in order to improve their grades, that we insisted that they do so. So all these risks that we took working with students, working with parents, working with teachers to implement the basic concept of what we wanted our school to eventually become did help us as a result of having the basic concepts in our mind of what we wanted to do to help our students understand that their education would be so important to them in order for them to follow through with the goals that we wanted them to implement and to decide for themselves, that we wanted to encourage as much as possible in order to help them. When I think about this, I even think about one of my math teachers that I told, those students are really not ready for the advanced math class. And we need to have classes on Saturdays and Sundays in order to help these students get prepared. And she was willing to come to work on Saturday and Sundays to help students develop their math skills so they would be able to take the proper math classes at our school. And when I think about all the things that we asked our English teacher to do, Mr. Siegel, a vast variety of things other than teaching English, he was able to help us with. And that happened with us, with the many, many staff members that we had, encouraged by Drew University, encouraged by the hospital, in order for us to implement a program that was successful and to carry out our goals.
Thank you,
And
Ms.
as the
Stark.
principal, there were many, many things that I wanted to implement that we were able to do so as a result,
All right, thank you, Ms.
taking the risk and knowing that eventually your dreams will come true.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Starke-Wallace, for sharing, talking about taking risk and how important that was to the development of King Drew. And we are approaching, we have about 7 more minutes or so left, and we have one more speaker. So I want to make sure that Ms. Marlbrough has a chance to speak. So Brandon, you ready to close us out? All
Let's
right.
do it. Let's do it. So, Ms. Edna Marlboro, she was the magnet coordinator at King Drew from 1989 to 2005. So I had the pleasure of overlapping with her for my freshman and sophomore year while I was at King Drew, during which time, since we're talking about anecdotes, she did chase me around a couple times, me and some friends. But we still were getting our work done, having a good time. So, Ms. Marlborough, can you please share some of your own personal anecdotes about your time at King Drew and experiences that you've had with students, parents, and the like?
Yes. Thanks, Brandon. I I can draw on any number of events while I was at King Drew, and one of them has to do with students who, uh, well, at the beginning of the school year, we always try to explain the various sites to the students because they didn't know anything about what to expect in the hospital either. So we would share what each site, along with Mr. Snodgrass, because there were always two other people to assist me. So we would explain to the students what the sites were all about. Well, invariably, everybody wanted to go to labor and delivery because they wanted to know where babies came from, or they wanted to go to the autopsy site because they wanted to see autopsies. Uh, but we had to make sure that the students who were assigned to those sites were strong enough to uh, take the to view whatever they saw. And so we would occasionally assign young men, but the patients had to okay that particular event in order for the students, even the young ladies, uh, for the because babies weren't born every day. Babies came when they got ready to come. So sometimes the kids were able to see babies being born, and sometimes they weren't. They were kind of disappointed, but invariably, the girls stood up pretty well, but the boys would faint. And so they would call me or look for me at the hospital and say, find Miss Malbrough. She needs to come and get so and so and take him back to school. And they would have him sitting down in a chair someplace, and I would come and get him and walk him back to school. And, you know, every one of them would say, now, Miss Malbrough, don't tell anybody I fainted, you know. And I said, of course I won't. But all the kids knew before we got back to the school, but everybody knew what was going on. So that was always a funny thing. And Siegel talks about being the basketball coach, but what he didn't tell you is twice I had to rush him to St. Francis Emergency Center because they played basketball so rough back there that he would end up with a broken arm or a broken leg. And so I had to put him in my car and rush him to St. Francis. And he can let you know who picked him up because he had a reliable childhood friend who would always be there to pick him up when he needed picking up. One of the I wanted to share too with recruitment. There were so many people at the hospital and the university, along with Miss Stark, who went to all kinds of meetings in the evening and talked about our school. So people were actually calling and sending in applications about applying to the school, but entire families began coming to the school. I can remember when right before I retired, I saw one of the seniors, the parents of one of the seniors, and this man they had 5 boys. And he told me, he said, Miss Malbrough, this is the last one. All 5 of them had attended King Drew. And so that, to me, that was just a wonderful, wonderful example of the school and its capabilities. Uh, in addition to that, we had various off-campus sites like Ella Fitzgerald Child Care Center and the senior, the Center for Seniors. And at first, I was hesitant about sending kids to the senior center They didn't do very much, but they didn't think they did very much, but I did. They would help serve them lunch or early breakfast, depending on what time the buses got there, because these were off-campus sites. But one day I visited and they had invited the most wonderful jazz band. These were volunteers, older people. I think it was a jazz quartet, about 4 men who went around doing this for seniors. And, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I just took me a seat as if I were a senior and I stayed there for a few minutes. But I guess the kids didn't know how to really appreciate that. But being an older person, having heard jazz and appreciated jazz, I was totally pleasantly surprised about what I saw. And the Watts Health Foundation was just so supportive. In fact, I happened to see at the Watts Health Foundation the Roderick Singster, who had been a counselee of mine when I was a counselor at Washington High School back in the early 70s. I knew this young man was very, very bright. And Roderick had gone to, I think, UC Irvine,
Okay.
but I didn't know what had happened to Roderick after that.
All right, so Miss Malbrough, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it is now the end of our class period. We have so many rich stories. I know that this is not over. We are totally going to find ways to continue to reach out to all of the people that have been included on our panel. I want to extend, can everybody in the chat, can you all please just give our panelists a thank you? I want to send a big thank you to Miss Malbrough, Ms. Starke-Wallace, Dr. Schumer, Dr. Bloom, and Mr. Siegel, and also my co-moderator, Mr. Sankara. Look at all this love coming in here. Yes.